everybody to be aware of that. And with that, let's progress to the next slide. So overview on agenda. Right now we're doing the intro and welcome, and please everybody be introducing yourselves in the chat on the side. Like I mentioned before, so the first talk is going to start at 2:10, and the second, and then go till 3. We're going to have ending about 10 minutes early and leave some room for questions there. And then our second talk will start at 3 and go till 3:55. Next slide, please. So I'm your moderator. My name is Colleen Rozier. For those who don't know me, I work for Karuk Tribe Department of Natural Resources for the Piggout Field Institute. Really excited to be here today. So this is a Zoom webinar format for those who aren't familiar. Essentially, that enables the panelists to talk and have video, but for those attending, there's no audio or video for you all. So all of your communication will need to come through the chat or through the question and answer box at the bottom of your screen. We'd love to know who you are, so please do introduce yourselves in the chat. And then if you can, please put your questions during the talks or after into the Q&A section at the bottom. If anyone has difficulty finding where that Q&A section is, you can mention that in the chat and Jody or I will help guide you to the right place. And like I mentioned, today is going to be recorded and it will be posted to the WKRP website, which you can see at the bottom of your screen there. And with that, I will hand it over to Cleo and Lisa. Sophie is not going to be able to join us today for our first presentation. Cleo, you can take it away.
Oops. Okay, I'm trying to share. Let me see. Try one more time. This was just working. Okay, I'm gonna try. Now you guys are seeing my desktop, but yes, not my. This is a play about salmon, that salmon migration called The Goldfish or Straight Flushes for the Manifestly Destined. And sorry, I had everything already and now it's, of course, here it is. Nope. Here it is. Okay. Why is it not going? Okay, sorry. Zoom is making my.
Yeah, it sometimes hides all the things that you need.
I know. Well, is this like a reasonable view for everyone? I know you're seeing a little bit of my desktop background, but it's not allowing me to like do the, hold on, I'm gonna just stop.
We can see it pretty well. I mean, it's pretty large.
Let me just try one more time. Okay, yeah, I'm just gonna do that. And oh, maybe this will be better. Okay, so
perfect.
This could, yeah, hopefully you guys can see the whole slide. I can't see the whole slide. I don't know why it's not working exactly right, but here we are. So Ayuki, thank you everyone for being here, and thanks to WKRP for the invitation. I'm here in Orleans in Karuk territory, doing some field work with 6 different students and a number of community collaborators and WKRP collaborators and DNR collaborators. And I live in Coast Salish territory in what's now known as Seattle, Washington, the shared lands and waters of the Duwamish, Suquamish, Muckleshoot, and Tulalip tribes. And in this project and in the other work that I do with my lab, which is called Feminist Research in Eco-Social Hydrological Relations, or FRESH Lab, we're always trying to work in a good way with community partners to advance all the work that they're doing and to support both with natural science research, but also yeah, with feminist perspectives, queer perspectives, and critical, like political ecology perspectives on how science gets translated into policy, and how all of these projects that are connecting the uplands to the river can move forward in a good way. So yeah, I had hoped to be here with Lisa and Sophie. Sophie is at the tail end of a 10-day fieldwork stint, and decided to take off a little bit early to make it back a little earlier. So I'll do my best to present their work. And Lisa will be joining us, but as you may know, there's like a PBS TV crew filming the fire that we've been doing the last few days at Tishonik. Colleen and I were out there till midnight last night on the fire line. So Lisa will be here hopefully but before the end of our time. And if not, she sends her good wishes and apologies. She said she'd rather be with you all than with PBS, but here we are. So yeah, I'm gonna talk today. Oh man, now I don't know how to do my slides. Oops. So yeah, I'm going to talk today about a little bit about this paper that just came out actually 2 days ago in American Naturalist, which, as many of you probably know, is a pretty like old guard, very respected biology journal, and they have an amazing special section that's coming out right now this week, that was guest edited by a number of feminist science studies scholars. So some of you may be like, well, what is feminist science studies? So feminist science studies is essentially like a field that is looking at science not only as, you know, what gets published in the research and what gets talked about even in presentations, but all of the social and political factors that go into science. So why do we decide to study this stream versus that stream, or this fire versus that fire? Why are we incorporating indigenous methods? Are we incorporating local knowledge? And so, you know, one of the early feminist science studies ideas was that science should start from everyday people's lives or women's lives, but we've broadened that out to be let's start from the lives of people who are at the front lines of all of these restoration and climate change and other, you know, settler colonial struggles, and how can we transform restoration science using multiple knowledges through like a community research cogeneration process. So we had 2 case studies. We were very excited to be invited to contribute to this special issue, and there's a lot of really awesome pieces in there. I encourage you to check it out. I can download them and send them to Jody if you guys don't have access. And this paper was led by my student, Samantha Klein, who is a master's student who worked on the Duwamish River, which is an urban river in Seattle. And we had a partnership there with the Duwamish tribe and the Duwamish River Community Coalition and the Environmental Coalition of South Seattle, which are 3 different frontline community groups that are working to restore this Superfund site. And then, so it's a river, but other than that, it's kind of as different from the Klamath as you can imagine in terms of what it looks like and how many people live there and all of that. But it's a river and it has a salmon run, and it has, just as here in the Klamath, it has a really active community that has been fighting for decades, right, to have the Superfund cleanup process happen in a good way, and to have community concerns incorporated into things like fishing access or park planning, or, you know, the salmon and shellfish and other species in that river, they have really high levels of mercury and PCBs and PAHs and other contaminants from these decades of industrial contamination. So, you know, are people aware that it might be safer to eat salmon than other species because they don't spend as much time in the river? So this is the larger context for this paper. And because this is WKRP, I'm not going to say much more about the Duwamish, but we have a really cool new project there, and I'm happy to talk about it in the Q&A. So in addition to Samantha Klein, James Lee, and Bryce Lewis Smith, Dan Sarna-Wadziki, who many of you know and who just is outside taking care of the kids right now, and Sally Lau are also co-authors along that on that paper alongside my graduate student Sophie Courtney and my co-PI on this project, Lisa Moorhead-Hellman. So let's see, how did I get the slides to actually go? So I just wanted to talk a little bit about what we've been doing. We have a number of different projects, the collaborative and the approach. We're focused on this project, and several of our projects are largely focused on Tishanik, which is, as most of you probably know, a river bar and ceremonial site here in downtown Orleans. So we'll talk about some of the history and impacts, this floodplain reconnection effort that Leif and Lisa Hillman are leading and we're supporting. And then some of the work that's kind of grown out of our conversations about Tishanik, kind of scaling up to the larger river corridor, to other mined sites, as well as to connecting more with WKRP objectives of moving up into the upslope. And Bill was reminding me the other day that WKRP was originally the upslope working group. So this will be a little river focused, but we are definitely thinking in our newer work about how can we understand the effects of some of the WKRP treatments and protocols on stream flow and river flow and stream temperature and the salmon. And so, we all know this is all connected. And so hopefully this is a chance to think a little bit more about the river corridor, but I'm really happy to talk about the upslope stuff as well. And then talk a little bit about the intergenerational learning and our collaboration with the PICAV Field Institute, the K-12 and also the higher education programs there in the context of Karuk resurgence. So these are everyone who's kind of working on this, a lot of partners from DNR, as well as Kathy McCovey, and then a number of different students. And you guys all know where Tishanik is. This is some early days. Me and Lisa and Dan actually took that picture, and Shay gathering willow root down at Tishanik and just thinking about, hey, this river used to be in a really different place. And so one of our early efforts was just taking this 1880 mining map and kind of tracing where the river goes. And then these are all the different some of the different focal species plots through RACA, and then some of the invasive species monitoring that MCWIC is doing out there. And so just thinking about, this vision that Leif and DNR and other, has had for decades of reconnecting the river, how would it impact all the work that's happened so far in terms of fire, and how could fire and flood really complement one another in restoring habitat for willows and salmon and poof and lots of other species on South Beach. And so this conversation really started back in 2019. So Lisa Moorhead-Hellman and I co-led a course, a field course for students from University of Washington, and then also students from the PICAV Field Institute. And this was a flyer for the students to join. And so you can see here, it was really focused on fisheries, and we worked with Taz and Binks and Mike and the fisheries crew. Here you can see us at, this is, I'm forgetting what this is, but anyway, you can see the grad students are learning to identify salmon, and the Karuk students are like, yeah, we know how to identify salmon. And so this was one of the really interesting outcomes of this project, was like, this idea of multiple knowledges, that the grad students come in with their book learning and their like analysis of, statistics and their analysis of policy, and yet they don't know how to see the fish in the stream. And this was really impactful for some of the Karuk students to say, wait, you can't see fish, you can't see salmon, you don't know how to identify them, you don't know how to make a burn pile, you don't know how to find poof poof. Like, so this really like put into focus, right? Like why we need these multiple knowledges. And at least this goal with this, and my goal too, is really to like show the Karuk students a pathway toward higher education where they could do research that would matter, here on the river and, to their families. And so we've continued working with the youth. We were just out yesterday cleaning out one of Lisa's spots to where there's a lot of black fern for basketry. And so this is really in many ways like the core of our project, is kind of coming back year after year and engaging with the high school and college age interns on science within an ecocultural context. And so I'm not going to give you guys too much theory because I know this is not really your jam, but just so that you're familiar a little bit more with this science and technology studies field. So when this is something that we wrote in a grant proposal, right, about what we're trying to do at Tishanik. And we're talking about these experimental methods from feminist science studies. So in science, Sarah Whatmore and her team convened this competency group, which is very much like WKRP in some regards, but had a lot more just like members of the public and people who had experienced flooding. This was in a community in the UK. And so we're trying to take this approach of competency groups, and this group really, there were also some modelers, like river modelers, and the competency group brought these folks together to say, hey, people who live in this community know a lot about floods and where they've happened and have ideas about why they're happening more. And modelers, can you put this in your model? And if so, great, maybe that model is useful. And if not, well, then the model is not useful, right? And so we're taking this idea of a competency group, but kind of adjusting it to be within Karuk protocol and led by Karuk cultural practitioners, predominantly in this case, Leif Hillman. And so the bold part, right, is like the key. So we're saying to avoid treating Indigenous representatives merely as additional stakeholders in a collaborative process, an eco-cultural approach to scale making emphasizes Indigenous-led experimentation and dialogue. And so then Kyle White, who's a really impactful Indigenous studies scholar of climate change, has talked about this idea of a cultural context group, which I think describes WKRP pretty well in terms of Indigenous leadership, made up of Native and non-Native practitioners who are really, figuring out how to walk between these two worlds of U.S. and state government policy and the way that people have always known how to manage the land around here. So that's the theory part. Hopefully it wasn't too painful. And so this is what we've been doing. So this is Sophie here in the front, and we're here at camp in Tishanik, and we're working with a really amazing team of landscape architecture students, Morgan Southall, Ryan, and Justine Velasco. And so they came with these, you can see this is a digital elevation model. And then we have a lot of aerials, and Lisa and Leif and a number of different DNR staff and community members just came out over the course of a week and just pointed out a lot of features, told a lot of stories about floods and where the river had gone and fires, and what the impact had been on invasives and on the willows. And then the landscape students took that back and then we put them to work too. So you can see Leif's got those really awesome ratcheting loppers, and some of the youth interns are recording him giving an interview, and some of the grad students and me and Dan and others are in the background just basically trying to cut down a lot of these really overgrown willows out there by that little high water channel out at Tishonik. And then we get to come back in the fall, and so Sophie is working on a study around willows, and I think it's similar in many ways to the work that Colleen did and Tony Marks Block did with hazel and huckleberry respectively, but just looking at willow wasn't necessarily burned super often. Since there were a lot of scouring floods, that was usually sufficient to maintain good sticks for basket weavers and good roots. But because the flows have been so much lower because of dam building and all the diversions in the Scott and the Shasta and the upper basin, we're not often getting these scouring floods. And so then basket weavers are adapting by coming in and using fire, to manage the willows. And Frank obviously told this whole story in his dissertation, so I won't belabor it, but Sophie's trying to build on that work, working with Lisa to see, how do these fires or these management practices impact the quality of sticks. And so Lisa's here is going through and rating the sticks for yes, I would use that, no, I wouldn't. And then Sophie's going back to lab and pulling on them with different implements to kind of test their breaking strength and doing, studying their density and trying to kind of quantify, through Western science, what the effects, what this indigenous knowledge is, already knows. And I think one thing that comes up a lot in this kind of research is okay, do we really need another study, to show kind of people what they already know, which is that fire makes willows better. And we went back and forth about this quite a bit in the lab. And where we landed is that, well, it might help for policy in some way to have these results, showing yet again, that this timing and approach to burning, actually works and should be supported through funding or planning or whatever. And also that, science may or may not be the answer. In many cases isn't the intervention that is needed in these different policy arenas. And so I always, encourage my students to, have one of your chapters be something that's really policy relevant that could support WKRP or fisheries or whoever the partner is on your research. And then also to make sure that, that we're doing that direct support of cleaning out someone's basket site or composting the willows or being out on tracks or just kind of directly supporting the work that's going on here. So we're also working with the Emilio and Ben and Jessica and Jesse, who are the the wildlife crew over at DNR, and they had a grant from Fish and Wildlife Service to see where beavers may or may not be and where they may or may not go following dam removal. And there's a lot of really cool beaver fire interactions that some of our collaborators have observed up in Washington, particularly in the Methil Valley, where they would get these big Slater type fires, and the only place that didn't burn were these beaver ponds where they had been relocating beavers up to the high country. And that then becomes, refugia for wildlife, and also, a kind of a buffer zone where there's at least some trees that survive. And then on the right here, you see Robin Room, and there they are with Taz doing a kind of a high resolution river survey to support some of the modeling around the river there at Tishonik, where it's kind of undercutting Red Cap Road. And Robin's also working on some fire hydrology work, looking at the how different severities of fire are impacting infiltration, soil infiltration and runoff in the uplands and some of these high mountain meadows. So there's definitely starting to be a nexus of potential work around high mountain meadows. And I know that that's a priority. We've been trying to coordinate with Salmon River Restoration Council, as well as the Scott River Restoration Council, and of course DNR, who all have interests up in those meadows that are catching our snowmelt, and thinking about how can we, how much does it matter, right, that there's water storage capacity? Does it keep the water cooler? if we could put beavers back up there, would they help somewhat compensate for reducing snowpack? And there's some interesting work from Washington that I could talk about more in the Q&A that shows that, yeah, okay, they help somewhat, but climate change is a big temperature forcing, as we're all very aware around here. So, beavers aren't the only answer, but they certainly could be part of the answer for, not only restoring a storage capacity of these wetland soils to hold that cool water back and release it down late in the season, when it's going to benefit both the coho and the steelhead that are rearing in the stream, but also the Chinook salmon that are coming up in the late summer and relying on those cold water pools of the tributary mouths. So, and also, as Luna and I were talking a bit, obviously these meadows are also like really good elk habitat and have lots of important cultural plants. So, we're happy to support that work in whatever way that we can with the expertise that we have in the lab. So that's kind of an overview, and I just wanted to focus in on Tishonik a bit. And this is a graphic that Ryan put together. It's a bit hard to see, but we also have a story map version, which I'll send the link around to, and you guys can look at it more closely. But on the bottom here, we have some of these historical imagery. So this is this mining map, which is from presumably the around 1890 or so, which DNR has, that shows Tishonik as an Indian village kind of surrounded by all the hydraulic mining infrastructure. And this is the main channel of the river at that time. This is Camp Creek coming in. Moving forward to this 1922 map that shows where they hydraulicked off the point feature over here, and that over here, this was hydraulicked off, and that caused the river to shift. And then you can see here's the 1922 channel in gray overlaid with the 1944 channel in black. And you can see, the river's kind of getting even more straightened, and then you have the dredge mining come in. And so between 1944 and 1945, it was just really that 1 year, but the dredge came in, they built this levee right here along the upper and on the right bank, upper end of Tishonik there, and forced the river up against that red cap area road. I don't know what that feature is called, but you guys probably do. And then what you see is there's this kind of high water channel over here, and then in here they ran the dredge back and forth. As you can see, I don't think this was the actual Orleans dredge. I think it was one that was in the Scott Valley, but a very similar process of just totally overturning all the sediments there, so that the fine sediments end up on the bottom, that big cobbles and boulders end up on the top. And the hydrology is just totally disrupted. And what happens after that is that the river just kind of stays pinned there. I mean, this is a levee made out of really giant boulders that the river is not going to be able to move. There's an area right at the very top, kind of, if you go in on Dredge Road and walk up upriver a couple hundred yards, there's this area where it's kind of a low point in the levee. So when you do have a high water flow, like in 1964, you can see it's carving out this channel. And I think this channel right here is probably a result of the 1964 flood. And then from 1998, you just see this river kind of getting more and more entrenched, but also starting to really erode into, and this is that area right under Red Cap Road, where the road slid out and is getting ready to slide out again, and even more so, right, eating away this land over here. So the kind of thinking about this history, this is history that again is coming from this multiple knowledge perspective, and a lot of local people looked at these maps and told stories and gave their interpretation, and this really, it's not like it wasn't information that people didn't know already, but I think seeing it in context and in this way over the course of 3 or 4 visits, like led to people really coming up with an idea of how we could go about restoring some of these floodplain processes, which were disrupted by all this mining, as well as all the forest and land cover changes. Oops. Yeah. So here you can see, right, looking over to Shanik from that spot up on Red Cap, and Leaf talking to some of my students about the goals. And so the goal here really is to revitalize floodplain ecocultural functions and the reciprocal relationships between human and other beings of the riverscape, and specifically, right, Karuk people, Karuk ceremony. And so we have these questions, which we started to investigate. And some of them are scientific questions, and some of them are more in this realm of science and technology studies. And we've been really trying to figure out how to fund this work, and it's been a challenge. We applied for National Science Foundation through the Science and Technology Studies division 3 times, and with this basically the same message, we tweaked it and honed it and added a few elements, and we're just found out last week that we were funded for this grant. So these are really the core questions that we're going to be working on over the next 2 years. What processes can be used to co-generate an anti-colonial framework for conceptual river restoration planning? How might an ecocultural river restoration plan be structured when produced through these processes? What benefits might these processes produce for Karuk youth, cultural practitioners, and knowledge ways? How might these processes advance tribal goals and sovereignty? So these are some of these questions that are often left out of Western science approaches and also restoration planning approaches. And we're trying to, kind of flip that process so that it's starting with these concerns and within Karuk protocol. And then once we have, 10% design, or maybe even a 30% design, then we'll go to, Bureau of Reclamation and Corps of Engineers and Fish and Game, Fish and Wildlife, and all those folks, and say, okay, here's the plan. How can you help us make this? And I think this is in line with what DNR and PCAV are trying to do also. So just a bit more on the design. I kind of talked about this, but we had this this iterative process of being in the field and then going back to the computer and using digital resources to generate maps and 3D models and conceptual plans, thinking about people's relationships with floodplains and how these floodplain regimes are shifting with climate change, but also they have already shifted so dramatically based on historical settler colonial processes of controlling water bodies, be that through mining or dam building or levees or water diversions. And so the conceptual framework that Lisa and I developed and that the students have really taken up, is this idea, and you saw it on the first slide, this I was calling it like a river model of justice, and like, what would it look like to have justice for the river? If the river itself was, is a being that we want, that we think is deserving of justice, like what would that mean? And she's like, oh yeah, well, we would just say like, Peshkesh Yav Musahish, like the river will look good. And if the river looks good, then we know, there's salmon there, there's willows there, it's flooding at the right time, it's not too dry. People can go down and do what they need to do. So this is really how we're talking about kind of translating back and forth between, English and Karuk and settler and Karuk science about, using approaches, right, that are centered in place and culture to repair these relationships. And we think that this can be applied beyond Tishanik, right, to other floodplains impacted by mining up and down the Klamath and the Salmon, but also, translated or could travel in some way to other cultural contexts where there might be other disruptions between people and their relations with the river. But by kind of doing these place-based activities that are really driven by community, we can kind of discover the culturally relevant framework for doing this work. So this is Sophie's piece, and here's was a photo taken at Tishanik where this is a basket that Lisa was working on while we were out there, and all the sticks that are there, probably most of them are from Tishanik, and the blackfern and the woodwardia, and the willow root are either from there or from further up Camp Creek. And so and Sophie's understanding, this is like kind of illustrating, and again, this is a different way of illustrating this principle of like this this river model of justice. And so she's doing this before or after control impact experiment. And you can see here Lisa wove a basket with these sticks, just really quick out there, unpeeled sticks, because it wasn't time when they were peeling, and then like tagged all the sticks with this, kind of rating them 1 to 5 on how good she thought that they were, and rolled them wove one basket from the control side, which is like over here where there hasn't been any work done on the willows, and one from the impact side where they've been coppicing forever, and we got to put some broadcast burn 3 checks last October. And then she'll come back this fall and select those sticks, harvest from those plots again and see what the outcomes are. And then, yeah, just a little bit on the Beaver project. So they with the wildlife crew and some of my students, they've been putting out game cams and looking for beaver sign and doing some eDNA studies to see, which of these creeks have beavers in them and which don't. So the eDNA is, you guys probably mostly know, but there's little pieces of every animal that is in the creek. Its DNA ends up in the water, and so you just go out and filter a water sample and send that to a lab, and you can tell them to look for one or more species. We're just telling them to look for beavers, to understand how to design a protocol for Karuk wildlife to use to study where beavers are now, and then post dam removal, how they're moving around and whether they're getting up into that affected reach. So up where we are in Washington, the Tulalip tribes are real innovators in beaver relocation, and they have this awesome project where beavers are bothering people down in the lowlands and the suburbs and plugging their culverts or flooding their driveways, and they call the tribes. They come out and trap them with the suitcase traps, the Hancock traps, and then take them up onto the Forest Service lands and the headwaters where beavers historically were, but they haven't been able to recolonize following the fur trade era. And so, we were out in the field all week, and we'll let you guys know where the beavers are and where they're not, but we saw a lot of sign, and it was pretty exciting. And I think one of the goals for Amelia and the wildlife crew is to think about, where could we make these sanctuaries for beavers? And so thinking about Tishanik as a place where it's a really broad floodplain, there's areas that, where there's high water channels where beaver dams probably wouldn't blow out in most years, and they'd be able to kind of maintain that habitat and recharge that groundwater and create that cold water habitat for coho and other species. So part of the designs that we've been working on are how can beavers be incorporated into that landscape. And then there's also a habitat model that I could talk more about if you want. And then the last thing that I'll just touch on really briefly, because I know some of you were at the workshop last week. We had 2 different workshops with these NCAR climate modelers, and we're exploring whether it would be a good idea to specify one of their downscaled climate models with Karuk and Iraq and other local knowledge and priorities. And so, they normally do stuff kind of at this scale where the river doesn't really look like a river and the Klamath Basin doesn't really look like Klamath Basin. And what they've done so far is scale it down, not only to 6 kilometers, but all the way down to 1 kilometer. And then these are some of the the outputs of the hydrograph and how the models observing, behaving compared to observations. And you can see here, it's in this run, it was capturing the high flows pretty well, not the low flows. So, it's a question of, and there's also a fire component, which as we were discussing, maybe isn't that useful, but some of the climate modeling inputs, like some of the modeled future weather scenarios might possibly be useful for some of the planning that you all are doing. And some of what Sophie's doing that's related to the climate model, but also just related to some internal like Karuk tribal work is it's kind of based on this method that was used up on the St. Lawrence River of looking at doing some language work to look at place names and see what river features might have been present before mining that aren't visible now. We can understand from place names or landscape features for that matter, meadows and clearings and other things like that. So Sophie's working with Leif Hillman and most of that will remain kind of internal to the tribe, but then we're thinking about how can we also make use of some of these historical oblique photos. So this is just from looking downriver towards Orleans, and then we use the drone to kind of re-photograph and compare some of the landscape features. You can see here, this is after they had hydraulicked off point at Tishonik, but before the river had kind of changed course. And then we can do that, elsewhere in the landscape as well. So there's a way in GIS to take one of these oblique photos that was taken from a high point. If you have real world coordinates of some features that you can pick out, then you can convert that into a DEM that's showing, in that kind of top down view, what the historical landscape might have looked like. So these are some of the products that are kind of inputs into the model, but that might also have some utility for WKRP and the cultural and prescribed fire planning. So just really briefly wrapping it up, we're working again with the youth. You can see here, this you can't really see, but this is a 3D model of Tishonik that we made from old topographic map and then printed it out on cardboard basically, and you could kind of see where the mine was. And then here's some of the youth interns from last year who are using, modeling clay to kind of put the river back where it was and fill in the mining cut and also imagine, right? Not only like to see the kind of past damage, but to imagine the features that they're wanting to see there. And I think I might have time to show you a little video about that that they produced. And so yeah, again, we're in this process of iterating and thinking about infrastructure out there and what can we build with all these locusts and stuff like that. And so yeah, to just leave you with these couple of lessons for scientists and managers. And then we're first convening this cultural context group. We've been doing that for the last couple of years. Starting either next year or the year after, depending on everyone's other projects and priorities. We'll try to get this design to a place where it makes sense to bring in some of the permitting and policy agencies, but to show them, yeah, a pretty worked out plan, like here on the river, in a very different context than they might be used to. This often brings up some interesting social dynamics, but that's all kind of part of the work that we're doing. And yeah, this is again tying back into the theory is a lot of times Western science is really driven, especially in the academy, but also in the agencies, is really driven by grant deadlines or funding timelines. And so we're like really open to and trying to slow down these processes, slow down the reasoning of established experts in order to open up the possibility of reasoning differently. So this is my new book. It just came out. Happy to talk more about it if you want. That's a picture of Camp Creek with a little rainbow over it. And it's mostly not about the Klamath, but it's definitely framed by my work here and what I've kind of learned yeah, through partnerships with many collaborators here. And I think that's where I'll leave it. And I'm happy to take questions. And then if we have any extra time, I'd love to show this little video that some of the youth put together last year.
Thanks so much, Cleo. I wanted to mention Lisa did jump on.
Hey,
So I didn't know if
Lisa!
you wanted to say anything,
Lisa, sorry I didn't see you. I couldn't see anything, but I hope I did okay. And maybe you wanna talk.
I don't, and I think you did very well. I just jumped on just a little bit ago because so thank you for inviting me, and I got to hear the last bit of it. But I really like where you talked about the importance of listening. Stop talking and listening, and I thought maybe I should do that maybe myself.
Well, it's awesome having you both join us. And thanks so much for that presentation, Cleo. It's wonderful to see you, Lisa. Now we're opening it up for questions from anybody who's attending. You can either put them in the chat or you can put them in the Q&A section at the bottom, if you can find that link on the screen. Thanks so much for covering all those many aspects of this long relationship and the beautiful work you've been doing with Lisa, with Leaf, with Kathy, at Tashanik and beyond along the river. Yeah. So anybody put questions? And then what was the video that you were mentioning, Cleo?
Yeah, so here, I'll just share the screen right now. So there's the 4 youth workers who worked last summer with us and with Stormy and Bruno. So this is a story map, which you guys can see. I'll put the link in the chat after, but they also have some videos that are in here, which I'm trying to find. There's Lisa and Leaf talking. Here, okay. So let's just put this up here while people are getting their videos in the chat, because they just did such a great job. If I can get it to play. Can you guys see that?
Hi, my name is Julia Jackson. I'm a youth worker for the Karuk tribe. I'm a sophomore in high school.
My name is Hatanim Drake, and I'm an uprising senior. One thing I would like to change about Tashanik is trying to take out the invasive species.
There are many native species in that area, but they're not able to grow like they should because of the invasive species.
Interesting about this project is trying to find a way to restore our land from what the miners did to it back in the day.
I know that when the miners came, they wanted gold, so they completely changed the course of the river. This impacted the fish and other river wildlife. The fish don't like the straight and fast current of the river like it is now. River changing also affects plants on land. For example, the willow don't get hit with the river because it doesn't come up high enough anymore. So the willows grow too big and they have to be burnt instead of washed up. The river also hits the bay, which will eventually cause the road above to collapse. This project and others like it affect our community by helping to engage and inspire community members and even people who don't live here to make a difference. With everyone participating in these types of projects, there will also be a lot more knowledge or issues in the community. My hopes for this community in the future are that our resources and culture can become stronger and things will slowly be returned to how they were originally supposed to be. Hi, my name is Julia Jackson.
Sorry, I don't know how to stop it. Okay, so they obviously said everything I said, but much more concisely. So there's another video that I will put the link in the chat, and you guys can all check this out and share it around. It's been approved, and it's there's no chat, but there's chat. So yeah. So anyone have any other questions, comments, responses, critiques?
It's a quiet crowd. I'm looking. I mean, there's just so many aspects of this work. I think it's helpful to hear. It's really cool to hear about. I think, you know, in particular, some of this floodplain reconnection at Tashanik, and some of the plans there are really quite powerful in terms of what, you know, can actually happen. I appreciate you sharing kind of some of the future directions or thoughts for that. And also the potential to do that in other places along the river corridor. Both of you guys thought that was really powerful. And it sounds like that's at the stage now, just so I'm understanding, where there's a conceptual design, but kind of further design and then implementation to actually be able to reroute the river in that area. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's very conceptual. Lisa, do you want to talk about what that your vision for that process at all?
As far as us thinking of the river, so I really I feel like as far as like that sort of like rerouting idea, kind of like I sort of push back against that. I feel like I want to help unleash it, or you know, like, so where it's not we're not trying to correct it. And this is actually an actual term. It's at least in you know, in German they would call, you know, so to korrigieren. So korrigieren the whole the flow of the river is like to correct it. Where I think, wow, no, we're not the masters here. There's someone else. A few of our gods are masters, you know, we're not it. Okay. So but we do have a responsibility to give it back the power that it needs to do what it needs for its own health and for all of our own health. So I think that's you know, that's really one of the things we, you know, we envision, we think about these things, what, you know, what's important, where we want to kind of help it. But essentially what we're doing is just helping it to heal itself and give it a jump start, so where that it has a chance, instead of like mowing straight down in this corrected kind of a tunnel vision future for the river, that the river can go, okay, thanks guys, I really needed the boost, but I got this.
Yeah, right. And so it's like when we were floating on the river last summer, you know, we had just a bunch of families out on rafts, and we stopped right here. Can you guys see my screen again?
Yes.
Stopped right here by the levee, and it was so clear from the river, like from the river, like, oh yeah, they built a levee. We
Yeah.
just have to breach the levee, and the river already breached it right here in 64. You know, probably it seems like, and again, it came again in 1990 or whatever that New Year's flood was. And then, you know, it comes across here and it comes across here. And then, so yeah, what if like, instead of this only flooding every 20 years, we just dug out a little bit of tillings right here, and then it would flood every, you know, 1 to 3 years, right? And so these are kind of the details that we're trying to work out, is like, you know, how often would it be beneficial for this to flow, for scouring out the willows that are in here, for creating off-channel habitat for fish? Because there's still some ponds there that have water that are connected to the groundwater. So, you know, we've started to have those conversations, and we have those kind of conceptually, like, it seems like this would be a good to flood. Correct me if I'm wrong, Lisa, but what I remember is every 1 to 3 years, it would be great if, and you know, in higher flows, you'd really scour out those willows. And then maybe there's some other channels up here that would only flood in higher water, but maybe the beavers would take up shop and then, you know, disperse themselves up and down the river from this little kind of sanctuary place. So yeah, I think that's part of that. I was talking earlier, at least, about the like river model of justice, or in your terms, the like Pishkeshiav, and it's like the river knows what to do, and we're just trying to take away this thing that the miners did to it, and then it'll probably figure it out on its own, right?
Yeah, that's what I've been thinking. I think it's going to be teaching us. I mean, we think we need to try and figure out what would be the best. I think we're gonna we're gonna get the lesson in, give it a decade, but we'll know more. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, yeah, and just pointing out the importance of language in all of this. And that was just a really profound moment of that. So thank you for that. I do see a question in the Q&A from Jesse Conaway.
Yeah, I see that too.
It says, thank you for your work, Lisa and Cleo. You mentioned landscape architecture grad students. Are there other grads and other programs too who are involved?
Yeah, so there's these two Beaver students, as we call them. They're in my program, which is the School of Marine and Environmental Affairs. So they're master's students, and we have this, it's like a collaborative thesis that they can do with a community partner. So DNR, and specifically wildlife, is the community. It's like a client basically for these students, Maddie and Hannah. So they were down there doing a lot of surveys, and they're going to write up some policy and kind of do some policy analysis in terms of what some of the barriers from California Fish and Wildlife might be, and how tribal sovereignty could kind of trump those barriers. And then we have Sophie Courtney is actually a student in the Department of Environmental and Forest Sciences. So it's like the old forestry school, and is co-advised by kind of a fish ecologist, Phil Levin. And then Robin Room is actually in the Civil and Environmental Engineering department and is more of a hydrologist. So yeah, we have students from those three departments, as well as an undergraduate from the Native American Studies program, who's also in the environmental science program, who seems like we'll be working with Lisa on some beargrass projects.
Awesome. Lisa, did you want to say anything to that too?
I did. So the thing is, with what we're, the students that we're working with now have strengths and interests, and they're almost always easily matched with projects. So to me, it's like, if you have an idea or an interest, or would like to just watch and kind of, there are so many things that can be done here. I mean, again, like as you said, Colleen, just thinking of the language. I was talking with someone earlier about that just an hour ago, saying that that we feel like, to talk about things in our language, you are actually reaching that. So those Ikarea, those first peoples, the spirit peoples, the willows and the salmon and the waters, the river, you're calling them, and they can hear, they can answer, and they know that you're calling for them. It's sort of it's so important to have that language to be able to talk to our relations from a linguistic standpoint, from a social standpoint. There's about a gazillion things to be looking at, and they all need to be looked at and considered. So, I mean, I think if you're a student with something that feels like, what, this calls to me, I think you need to talk to someone, and we're right here ready to listen. And then we might go, oh, wow, no way. No, I'm just teasing. Just teasing.
Beautiful. Well, thank you. Thank you both. Are there any closing words before I move us to our next presentation with the safe crowd? Cleo, you're muted.
I just wanted to say I'm very sorry to be so rude, but Lisa and I had a previously scheduled meeting that started at 3 that's actually related to this. So I'm sorry to miss the safe presentation, but I will be around for your workshop on the 6th, and please excuse us. It's not out of a lack of interest.
Well, thank you both very, very much for the beautiful presentation, Yotwa, and we look forward to seeing you soon. With that, I will move us into our next presentation. The safe crowd, if you guys can unmute whoever is supposed to speak next, I will be handing it over to you and I will bring us to question and answer around 3:45. So again, everyone put your questions and answers in the Q&A section and we will cover them shortly. Talk to you soon.
Thanks, Colleen. We can't actually turn our video on for some reason. It says that the host has stopped us from turning it on.
You should go ahead and do that now. You should be able to do that.
But we can.
Also, I just want to say Lisa was part of the design of this whole project, so we're living off her ideas. So
So I think we've got another camera in the room, and I'll just use my camera and we'll get this to work.
Here we are.
We can see that now.
Yes. Alrighty. Can you hear us just fine?
Yes.
All right. Thank you. There's a group of us here today. Hi. I'm Tommy Garcia. I'm a research engineer at the Shots Energy Research Center.
I'm Sean Bork. I work at DNR and PKF.
I'm Peter Alstone. I'm a professor here at Cal Poly Humboldt.
Yes.
Hi, everyone. I'm Deepthi, and I'm a professor at Cal Poly Humboldt, and I'm not in the same room as them, which is why I'm calling it separately.
Right. So, and thank you. We're happy to be here today. We're here in Wiyut territory at Cal Poly Humboldt, not in Orleans, but we're going to be talking about some work that we're doing on a project that's called the SAFE project. The SAFE project stands for Smoke, Air, Fire, and Energy. And the presentation is focusing really on the air part of it. So we called this presentation Safe Air for Everyone. I just want to point out that's also an acronym for SAFE. So we really like SAFE quite a lot. And this is focused on air quality monitoring, air filtration in the context of fires, and we'll talk a little bit about energy systems too. You'll be hearing from me along with Shay, Tanya, and Deepthi today. And want to acknowledge too that we have some other co-PIs, Tesfa Johannes Jakob and Jana Gagnon, who are not able to be here, along with a number of other collaborators. And as Shay mentioned, Lisa was instrumental in helping to conceptualize and develop this project at the beginning. And we're thankful for that start. We're going to start by describing a bit about the overall projects that we're working on, and then get into some of our preliminary results. So the overall goal of this project is identifying sustainable pathways for climate-smart rural California communities, and looking at the need for both energy and air quality infrastructure that is developed integrating social dimensions of change, and with a particular focus on indigenous communities. So this project is in collaboration with the Karuk tribe and also the Blue Lake Rancheria tribe. And in the context of increasing risks of climate change and fire that I don't need to explain to this group. So I mentioned our project team includes folks here at the Shots Energy Research Center, Cal Poly Humboldt, Arcata, also the Blue Lake Rancheria tribe nearby on the Mad River, and the Karuk tribe with a real focus in the community of Orleans, but also considering needs of folks across the Aboriginal lands in the Mid-Klamath region. One of the reasons that it's really important to do the work of the SAFE project here, and this is one of the ways that we advocated for why this project was important, is that the Mid-Klamath and the sort of Northwest California area is already impacted by wildfire smoke. We all know this, but this is from a paper that was written in 2018 showing the current day. So on the left is the year 2000 approximately, impact of particulate matter. It's measured in units of micrograms per cubic meter, and so that the colors on the map are related to that particulate matter concentration. And this is the average annual concentration from fire. What we can see is that we're in this part of California, or this region, the Klamath region, are already about as bad as it gets in the context of the United States, and that the things that we could learn through this project are going to be useful for lots of people as climate change expands the kind of risks of fire and attendant smoke that comes with that. So the other part of our project, beyond thinking about air quality and smoke, is also the need for more reliable electricity and electricity that's decarbonized, because we can't just keep burning fossil fuels to provide resilient power through backup generators. So the picture here shows a microgrid that's located at Blue Lake Rancheria that was constructed prior to this project. This is a microgrid that's on a fueling station, on a gas station, which is a really critical site. You can see the line of cars running down the street. This was a picture taken during the 2019 public safety power shutoff blackout, where there were a whole line of people who really wanted fuel for their vehicles, similar lines for ice to keep food cold in refrigerators. So there's a real need for resilient energy systems to help cope with the fact that the electricity system is getting less reliable as the fire threats are recognized and are accounted for by the utilities. And so the project that we're working on, SAFE, we're kind of meeting these challenges, working with community partners to identify sustainable infrastructure pathways. And so that includes microgrids and clean energy, air quality sensors, air filtration, and all of these are meant to support the use of prescribed fire and cultural fire, recognizing, as I've heard folks from the Karuk tribe say, there's not some no fire or no smoke alternative. So we've got to live within the world that we've got, in the world that we want, which is going to include fire and it's going to include smoke. So question is, what's the infrastructure needed to get what? And so we're looking at some of the infrastructure. So that was our overall project scope. What you're going to be hearing about in more detail in this presentation is what we've learned so far about supporting safe air for everyone in the Mid-Klamath region. So that includes expanding air sensor networks so that we can understand how the air is outside, supporting targeted air monitoring during prescribed burns. So how can we target our air sensing to support good fire? Household air filtration for keeping air safe indoors. We're thinking about this in the context of community needs and hearing from community members how they think and feel about smoke and fire, and are really focusing on not only writing papers, and actually not even writing papers first, but really how do we take these needs that we've identified and get to resources that we can use to implement at scale. And so how can we get to this goal of safe air, safe energy for everyone? So I'll begin by describing some of the air sensor network expansion that we've done. Want to recognize too that Tesfa Jakob would be describing these parts of the presentation if you were able to make it. But we've got a list of goals for the air sensor network expansion. They're described here. They include really working to get better information to support community decisions and support community priorities that can be helped by having air quality sensors. Recognizing that this needs to be something that's a tribal partner program, that it's part of being sustainable here means having the knowledge and resources to run air quality sensors locally. We identified that there's really not enough air sensing in the region, and that we want to provide better or adequate spatial and also in time particulate matter data, and with a real focus on the times when there's the highest risk for human health, which would be during wildfires. We're interested to cover areas not only in the cities, but also more sparsely populated areas with people, and also recognizing that it's important to have air quality sensors where people aren't, because there are lots of other animals and plants and other life that rely on clean air. So the progress that we've done so far is we've developed procedures and deployed air sensors, really learned about what it takes to get low-cost air sensors like the one in the photo here, this purple air sensor, out into the world. We've deployed about 10 of these. Some of them are actually offline right now, and we're working to get them back online. They blink off when somebody changes their Wi-Fi password or something like that. So we're learning things about how to make this work. Yeah, Shay.
I would just say before fire season, we're trying to have it up in like higher elevations than just the river valley. That was Bill's idea. So
Yeah.
we want to get all the data we can, like not just the valley floor. Right now we have a pretty good network to Happy Camp, a little bit up the salmon. So
Yeah. And if anybody on the call says, hey, I've got a house with good Wi-Fi that's up high, or in a place where there's not a sensor, we'd love to hear from you. And we're looking for hosts, because these sensors need a home. They need somebody who's going to care for the sensor, who's got reliable electricity and hopefully Wi-Fi, so that the data from the sensor can be available to your neighbors and your folks in the community.
they don't suck up much of your Wi-Fi. It's
Yeah, there's not a lot of data, and they use like 1 watt, which is a
That's-
tiny amount of electricity.
Your phone charger.
Yeah, it's like
less.
having an extra phone charger sitting there. And we've worked on developing data visualization and management, and working to refine this. Oh, so Jody's letting us know we can only see video from the room where we're sitting there. Okay, I'll face that way then. Thanks, Jody.
No, you
So-
guys also look great. Just we can see you all at the table as well.
Okay. No, I'm glad to know that, because I was looking at the wrong camera. So this is an example of some of the data that we can get from these low-cost air sensors, Purple Air network. The map in the middle makes it look like these things are dense across the landscape, but if you've ever zoomed into this map, you know that it's pretty sparse in the Mid-Klamath region compared to cities. So we're working to get better sensor density. It's really important to get that because, as we mentioned, the region experiences long-term inundation from wildfires. You know, mostly these uncontrolled wildfires burning on poorly managed Forest Service land. The graph on the right is a way of looking at this air data that we developed, and it's meant to help interpret just kind of the time series, or like over the course of time, what's going on with the air. So the colors of the dots correspond to the particulate matter level, and we use the same color coding as the US EPA, the same as the purple air map shows. The air quality index categorizes air into good, moderate, unhealthy for sensitive folks, unhealthy for everybody, hazardous, and then purple. So it's like run away type air, but we know you can't run away.
The river was in purple for a lot of the summer last year.
Yeah.
And you can see here on the map actually that it's that dark purple, or like not past purple, right?
Yeah,
It's like
burgundy.
that burgundy
Yeah.
500 level, very hazardous, bad.
Yeah, so over the course of several weeks, last fall, this was in Central Orleans. There were days upon days of unhealthy, very unhealthy air. spiking into the purple and burgundy zone, which placed it in the worst air quality in the world during those times.
Worse than Beijing or Italy or anything.
And so that's sort of for broad situational awareness. We also recognize the importance of having air networks for prescribed fire to show the differences between the smoke from prescribed fire and wildfires, and to document, to support more use of prescribed fire in the landscape. And so we pilot tested deploying sensors in the woods right nearby prescribed fire during the burns that happened last fall. So the sensor that's in the picture here is adjacent to the Patterson burn unit as part of the SOMSPAR Integrated Fire Management Project. Some of you probably been involved with that. And what we saw was that the levels of smoke just adjacent, just to the south of that burn unit were relatively low for the whole week that there was active burns going on up in that region. And there were times when the particulate matters went up, but not like that inundation that we saw in the previous graph. And so getting data like this helps to support decision-making and support outreach to policymakers, we hope, to support the broader use of prescribed fire.
As well as community understanding of the impacts of smoke.
Yeah.
Right.
And similarly, during some cultural fires at Tashanik that we heard about from Clio. So we've got this great kind of overlap between our work here. We saw, we put sensors in 2 locations in town. So one was across the river, Red Cap, near housing, and another was on Dredge Road in Orleans. It actually turned out to be really good that we put out these solar powered temporary sensors because the power went out during the weekend. And so the normal purple air sensors that would have picked up the smoke from this fire were offline. So it was only our solar powered temporary sensors that were there. So these 2 sensors actually showed really different stories, even though they were within sight of each other across the river, where in central Orleans, the air quality did get smoky for about 12 hours towards the evening after that fire, and then tailed off overnight. While across the river on Red Cap, there really wasn't the same level of smoke impact. So it kind of emphasizes how air quality, even though it seems like it's this real landscape scale thing, is really hyper-local, especially with these targeted prescribed and cultural fires. And going forward, it could be that more temporary low-cost sensors are deployed. We've also discussed and had some ideas about using drones to collect kind of higher spatial resolution and also up into the air column smoke data for during these kinds of prescribed fires. We're interested in what WKRP folks think is useful here. Could put it in the chat or the Q&A if you think the temporary sensors seem more useful, or just more permanent sensors, or you really like the drone. Interested to hear from folks either now or next little bit.
Vote now.
Go ahead.
Just before we switch to Tanya, I just wanted to mention that Jana is also here with us. And so I just wanted to, just give Jana an opportunity to just quickly say hi, because we all introduced ourselves at the beginning, and then or maybe we can do it at the end, but I just wanted to mention that Jana's here. Hi, Jana, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. It's great to be here. I apologize for joining a little bit late. My name is Jana Gagnon, and I am the Sustainability and Government Affairs Director for the Blue Lake Rancheria tribe. And it's been my distinct honor to work with this team on the SAFE project and just here to answer questions and join in discussion. Thank you.
Thanks.
Glad you're here, Jana. So another part of the SAFE project is that we had a household study, and the priority of the household study was to understand what the needs were for homes during these wildfire and smoke events. And so the way we did this was that we tested high quality air filtration systems. You can see here on the right that we have a large air filter that has about 500 cubic feet per minute. And this is the clean force, and we had a smaller one with about half of that at 250 cubic feet per minute. And so we used some models we created to size those purifiers. Additionally, we also were measuring the indoor air quality with the same purple air low cost sensors devices, as well as the run times. And we did that with these data loggers. And so these can tell us what setting the purifiers were on, whether they're on or off. And essentially we had a big purifier in the common space, which is a living room, and we had the smaller purifier in a single bedroom. And we conducted some interviews and surveys with the household participants to gather some insights on what was important to them regarding smoke, air, fire, and energy.
Really quick, I would just say what the health people are giving out, which is great, or like what we were giving out for bedrooms. You
Yeah.
know, it's not like a whole living space, you know.
Yeah.
I'm chugging here.
Yeah, so like a normal air filtration unit that you might go to like Walmart or something and buy might be 100 CFM or 150. And it's just not enough to meet the need that we see with the outdoor air quality.
Not when there's that heavy smoke inundation. That might be good for pollen. I don't know.
Right.
And so essentially so far what we have are 9 households that are a part of the study. And we have some data we collected from the fall 2021 fire events, and we'll continue to provide replacement filters for these and continue the study through the 2022 fire event. And we'll also are planning on having follow-up interviews with folks to see how the purifiers worked with them, things they liked, things they didn't like, and just get this insight. And so here are some plots. They're similar to the plots Peter was showing earlier. So here on the left, we have household 3 out of the household study, and we have 1 through 8 on the right. And so we're continuing to do data analysis. And what we can see from these plots is that there's been significant reduction in indoor PM 2.5. So the purple lines in these plots are the outside concentrations from the closest sensor that we have deployed. And then the orange is the main bedroom or the main room, which would be the living room or the open common space. And the green line is the bedroom. And so there's a few things to note looking at this plot on the left and the plots on the right. And some of those are that there may be times where the indoor concentration is higher than the outdoor concentration. You can see here on the left plot, close to September 2nd, that is spiked a bit in the main room, and that might be because folks are cooking food inside, or maybe someone's smoking. And so there's definitely a lot of variation. Yeah, they could have turned the purifier off. And so what this shows a lot is the just behavioral differences. There's also times like Shane was just saying, maybe someone turned it off. Closer to September 6th, we can see that there's a spike in the plot on the left. Also on the plots on the right, in household 4, you can see that there's a chunk of time where it didn't increase past the outdoor concentration, but there was a time that it had a high concentration and then spiked back down. And so from the HOBO data that isn't presented up here, or the data logging, the power logging, we'll be able to see whether it's because purifiers were turned on, purifiers were turned off. And I think something important to note is that we talked about the color coding and what PM 2.5 levels are impacting folks. And so between 35 and 55 micrograms per cubic meter is unhealthy for sensitive groups. And so that's kind of around this line here. And so we can see that with the purifiers' help, a lot of the households have been able to maintain a indoor air quality level around there instead of these 200 or 300 micrograms per cubic meter, which are very hazardous. And so we had conducted some interviews, some preliminary interviews with folks that participated in the study. And here are some of the insights we have. Deepti also conducted some interviews with other cultural leaders and folks in the community. And so she's going to talk about that afterwards. And so some things we got from household participants were the status quo. Essentially, electricity is unreliable in the community and there's frequent power outages. We have to remember this is also happening during the PG&E PSPSs and wildfires and all those things. There's also a general lack of trust in PG&E, which is the local electricity provider. And there's also confusion amongst folks with their electricity bills. And a lot of folks said that smoke is worse than it used to be. And as Peter said, smoke is a part of life and fire, but it's just getting a lot worse. And that it's having a negative impact on children and elders. Some of the priorities that we got from these interviews was food, keeping food from spoiling during blackouts. There's lots of folks that had backup generators or were using other methods to secure that they had food. And there's food for eating, there's cultural food, there's lots of things there. Additionally, a lot of people were interested in renewable energy. And a quote, so that we aren't reliant on PG&E or held hostage. And so there's a need and desire for resilient energy. And then lastly, folks said that everyone should have an air purifier. And essentially that's not just folks in households, that's also community buildings. Everywhere you go, there should be an air purifier. And that having an air purifier, as Peter mentioned, like a high performing purifier that's sized appropriately to the space will contribute to having clean air and less health issues like asthma attacks and an overall better quality of life. Some barriers to these have to do with upfront costs for renewable energy, as well as the lack of contractors. This is about 2 hours away from the coast where a lot of contractors are. And so it does take time and energy and money to get out there to be doing these things, and building microgrids isn't cheap, inexpensive. And then lastly, air purifiers are costly as well as getting replacement filters if you're in somewhere that you have high inundation of smoke and you're going to need to replace the filter more often than somewhere that's not. Also, purifiers are not just cleaning smoke, they're cleaning pollen and other allergens in the air and things like that. So yes, lots of things. And so I'm going to hand it off to Deepti to continue with the questions and interviews she conducted in the community.
Thank you, Tanya. And I wanted to just reiterate our gratitude as a project. I wanted to reiterate our gratitude to Lisa, who was instrumental in helping us think through the ways in which we could integrate these different pieces of the project. From the beginning, we've known and we've wanted to foreground the fact that there's a lot of community expertise on questions of smoke, air, and fire. And that while certainly there's a lot of value in the sensor network and in quantifying air quality in terms of particulate matter, there was already deeply held knowledge about questions of smoke and air and fire. And so we wanted to make sure that our project was doing justice to that, documenting that, and thinking about ways in which these multiple knowledges might actually come together in support of community goals. And so I want to reiterate how important it was for us to have those early conversations with Lisa in order to be able to do that in this way. So as Tanya was saying earlier, there are several places in this project where we've been engaging with communities. So Tanya was describing the household study. We've also been conducting in-depth semi-structured interviews with a variety of different people in the community. So what I'm going to be summarizing right now are some of those insights that we've gained through those interviews. The first thing that was almost universally expressed was that there's a marked worsening of air quality, both in terms of spatial and temporal terms. So what that means is, temporally, in the past, perhaps 20 or 30 years ago, maybe there would be 1 week in the summer when there would be bad air days. But, last summer was 74 days and this summer was 50 days, this summer meaning last summer. And so basically, as time has gone on, the number of bad air days has really spread in terms of time. And then in terms of spatial spread, in the past, the coast used to be a refuge when the air was bad inland. And so nowadays there was this expressed opinion that there's like a feeling of entrapment in bad air. So there's really nowhere to go. So you can't really escape to the coast as people used to earlier. So some of the strategies that community members express to manage exposures to bad air would be to change elevation. So to try to go higher, in order to escape smoke, go to the coast, as we mentioned earlier, or stay indoors, wearing masks and using air filters. If you don't mind changing to the next slide, Tanya. Sorry, I don't have control over it. Yeah, thank you. And so as I was saying, there's a lot of in-depth knowledge about smoke that the community already has, and there's multiple ways of knowing smoke and discerning it. One of the first things that we've documented, and many people were saying this, is that all smoke is not bad, just like all fire is not bad. There's good fire, good smoke, bad smoke. And so thinking about what makes smoke good and what makes smoke bad, what are the qualities of good smoke versus bad smoke. And so thinking about the visual and olfactory, taste and other sensory cues for thinking about smoke. So remember, this is all, multiple other ways of knowing about smoke besides the particulate matter concentration measurements. And so, what are some examples of multiple other ways of knowing about smoke? For example, a visual cue may be when someone might say, when I can't see that hill from my window, I know that it's bad. Or, other sensory cues might be, if you get up in the morning and you taste it, it's really bad. It's funky, or it's close and there's a lot of it. So then, kind of going into a little bit of detail about what makes smoke good, or what are some sources of good smoke. And here are some of the examples that community members shared with us. Some people smoke, or if you burn particular roots and then you bathe yourself in that smoke, smoke for prayer, campfire smoke, smoking fish, ceremonial fire smoke, the ceremonial sweat house. And then there's lighter smoke in the valley that is actually not moist and doesn't linger. So conversely, some attributes of bad smoke are that, when it's really dirty smoke, or it's dank and moist, and it lays down in the valley and it doesn't move. There was a lot of really rich details shared about, how smoke from prescribed fires has particular characteristics, like it's wisps of blue or gray, and wildfire smoke actually looks different. I know we're a little bit short on time, so I won't go too much into detail into that right now, but happy to chat more during Q&A. One thing I want to end on saying in this slide is that there's varied perceptions of the connections between smoke and health, and some community members are much more concerned about it, and some community members are thinking that it's just part of life now. They've just gotten used to it. Tanya, thank you. And so then I wanted to briefly also mention some community insights about fires. We talk about good fire, bad fire, and it's very context dependent and purpose dependent, and of course, physical characteristic dependent. And so, some things about good fires, it's not about going for acreage, but it's actually a product to help somebody. And in the context of helping cultural foods and fibers, and again, this is not new to this audience at all, so I don't want to belabor this point. But just thinking about the conditions under which fires can be good and helpful, and the conditions under which they are unhelpful. It was also really important to think about how, good fires right now are not happening in a vacuum. They're happening amidst a long history of suppression. So thinking about, fires that are being done right now, kind of like reset fires to try to get the landscape back to where it needs to be before you can actually get the really good fire. So there was a lot of talk about how do you get the landscape to where it needs to be in order to be able to practice good fire. And questions about what are bad fires. I think almost everyone can agree that there's catastrophic high intensity wildfires are bad. And then there's a little bit of discussion to be had on what kinds of suppression actions are actually beneficial or not. And then there's a general sense of frustration about the fires and how it crowds out some of the good fire work that needs to be done. Tanya, if you don't mind, thank you. So I wanted to also just briefly highlight some community identified needs. There's, this has emerged through these interviews, but how there's more data needed on the smoke from prescribed fires and other fires. And then, in context of our project, we can think through the potential for low-cost sensors to provide some of this data. And this goes back to something that Peter was mentioning earlier on, is that there's perhaps a couple of different options for data collection. And so it would be really helpful for us to hear from the audience here today what your feedback or ideas are on what kinds of data collection would be most helpful for prescribed and other fires. And then some of the community desire was for more data on the health impacts of each of these kinds of smoke events. And then again, just from the interviews, tribes need more resources to hire people year round to be doing prescribed fires and managing landscapes and not have it be just a seasonal thing, and more air filtration needed in homes and community buildings in order to make sure that there's clean air. So, and again, we're looking for feedback from the audience here today and WKRP on some of these community identified needs, or perhaps there's additional things that we should be doing. Tanya, thank you. And I'm going to turn it over to Shay now to conclude our presentation.
Sure. What things we're doing is we already applied to and received the Cal 100 grant, which is with the Karuk Health Department, and we'll be able to purchase 100 to 200 high quality air filters for households. They'll be dispersed wherever the fires are this year. That's a 2-year grant. That should get these out to more people in our study, And then we also applied to the EPA for a grant that would get a whole bunch more of the Purple Airs network going, but also an EBAM, because that's how it works. Is the EBAMs are the official air quality, and if you look for Orleans, they take it in the winter on the coast. They said that's our air quality, so it's not really very what we actually experience, and so it's kind of a problem with different ways of looking at our health in Orleans is we don't have these EMAPs. And so that's in the hopper. And also PG&E is, it's not released yet, but they're going to release a microgrid program for, I don't know how many microgrids, but
Few dozen.
yeah.
The millions of dollars.
Yeah, and we've been talking to them already, pre it coming out, and they're really interested in Orleans having a microgrid, and Hoopa and Ridgeback, and just all of us. We're gonna build a microgrid out because they don't help. If it goes out so much, it would go up to some as well. And also we're applying to the TCC grant. It's transforming communities into pilot or something. It's like big grants. It's like kind of like the Green New Deal actually funded by California. And so it's like, if we get the PG&E, we can get the match for that and get big money to get electric cars and charging stations and do a lot of stuff in Orleans. If we get plenty of grant, we'll have public meetings about this with every group in Orleans to see what people really their priorities are for climate change, knowing just to be more resilient for our community. So that's what we're working on right now.
Yeah, so going forward, we're going to continue engaging with the communities, both Orleans and the Karuk communities, along with Blue Lake Rancheria, really understanding priorities for infrastructure. We're working towards accessing funding and resources to meet those community needs. There's a big need and underinvestment in infrastructure.
Well,
and
now the money's out there with everything going on, the infrastructure bill and everything. So Orleans should get a taste of it.
Yeah.
To be equitable.
So, like we sort of jokingly, but not jokingly, said that like our favorite way of writing about our results is in follow-up grant applications that get better resources into the communities. But we're also going to be writing up the results and communicating in a broad range of forums, one of which is a Rural Resilience Symposium. We're planning for the coming year. Date and time will be determined soon. We'd love to have community participation in that. And that would be an opportunity to come together in person, and there will be a hybrid option too, but to have discussions about a lot of the themes and topics that we've been looking into. And there's a whole list of folks here. I won't read all the names, but we appreciate all of the people who've been working on the SAFE projects. Yeah, leave it there. We're happy to answer questions.
Questions.
And thank you for having us at this forum.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much for that presentation. I definitely learned a lot. Everyone listening, please add your questions to the Q&A or put them in the chat. But I'll start with a couple of my own that I've jotted down while you guys have been talking. A few. One was back to a slide, I think maybe Tanya, you were sharing the kind of smoke outdoor versus or the particulate matter outdoor, indoor bedroom. Yeah. So I was wondering if you guys have pinpointed the worst time of day from these for smoke. It seems like there's a pattern, a daily pattern, diurnal pattern that's going on. Or if not, I'd be curious.
We haven't done that yet. No, but
From my air filter, which
Yeah.
is the same kind, it usually kicks up in the day, and at night it kind of gets more chill. You might actually open a window, potentially some days. I think at night is when it's less than in the day, but everything, it's all different, because the fire, it switches direction at night, right? So it's not raging up. I don't know. That's what
I'm
they have
writing
their
that
own
down
studies.
for our analysis to look that into.
It would be cool just because I was looking at this and it looks like there's a pretty distinct pattern. And then I'm also curious if, those days where it kind of goes across, if that was an inversion or what was kind of causing that. And then it also did seem like, that there were kind of different patterns for the bedroom versus the main room. And I know you're going to be adding the data logger, and there's a whole number of factors to be considered, but I was also curious about what the difference between those two was. It looked like there were more spikes for the main room versus these kind of like bigger humps or smaller humps for the bedrooms.
I think the spikes are mostly from cooking.
Yeah. Frying.
If you're frying
Bacon
some
makes it go
bacon
off,
or whatever else you're
or
frying
you
up,
burn something,
that
like my daughter
yeah.
leaves the
Something
pan
that's
on.
cool about these purifiers, you can see that there's like a whole interface, and they also have, I don't know if you can see this, but there's like a 13. They're telling you actively, they're not as accurate as the purple air sensors, but they are telling you the air quality inside, and they have lights like green, blue, red, and there's an auto setting. And so that could also impact what's going on here, that some of these have auto settings. So when someone does cook, we might not be seeing that because it knows to turn the setting up to the highest level. And maybe some folks, they cook and they didn't think to turn their purifier up higher. But I think a lot of it is probably cooking.
Auto setting is really useful
Yeah.
from my experience.
Yeah, we heard from a lot of people that they really liked that automatic. Think of it like a smokostat, sort of like your thermostat. Your thermostat detects when it's hot or cold and turns on the air conditioning or the heat. The smokostat that's built into these kinds of air filters detects when it's smoky, and it ramps up, and then it turns back down when it's cleaned up. And so these are kind of new widgets and new technology. They aren't perfect, but definitely are benefiting from some of the improvements in air sensing that's happening.
Awesome. And was it in all the main rooms that you had those clean forces, and in all the bedroom, like you had the same one in all the, okay.
And it seems like a year of smoke, you're doing new filters in a lot of the houses, because it tells you which to filter. A lot of people would give new filters.
Yeah.
For this coming fire
Like
season.
replacement filters, not the purifier itself, but opening it up and taking out the old filter and putting in a new filter.
You're saying once per year annually?
Some last longer, depends where you are really,
Yeah, also pets, like
Yeah.
I've seen some that had lots of animal hair in them.
Or just
Some folks live close to an
dirt
orchard,
roads and
yeah,
stuff,
dirt road, orchards, things like that.
Great. And did you guys compare between different air filters as far as which ones were better or not really?
That was your COVID activities, right, guys?
Yeah.
Well, during COVID, we had, we put that long list of names. So we had some undergrad students, some graduate students, like the EPA had a program called the Energy Star program, where they were essentially quantifying the specifications of all these different purifiers. And so we had a student go through all that data, and we put some constraints on it and thought about, CADR rates, so change in
Clean air delivery.
clean
rates.
air delivery rates, right? So that's how often the air inside the room is being exchanged. And you can see here, we ended up going with, this is cubic feet per minute. And so we did get like, we decided we would go with like a big one and like a medium, small one. Like Peter mentioned earlier, the ones you kind of buy are typically like 100 or 150 CFM.
What people are getting from the tribal department right now. That's just all they don't, we're working with them because they haven't had access to do this, they just get some filters and buy them,
Yeah.
Yeah, so we chose from an EPA list already that had already identified some good HEPA filters. We didn't do the ones that create ozone,
Yeah.
right? We did some elimination on not wanting purifiers that had static, right?
The other thing we did is we bought a couple, like once we had it narrowed down to a few options, we bought them and tried them out. And one of the things that we really were focused on was the noise, both like how noisy they are, but also how annoying they sounded. And we picked the ones that were the least annoying and the least
Yeah,
bad sound.
and this one had wheels, so it's
Yeah.
big, but it's on wheels, so
So,
I live off grid, and that doesn't use much power for your off grid system. It's like
oh yeah,
100 watts or
Yeah.
less. When it's on
The big one?
yeah.
yeah.
That's
So-
great.
So we're not trying to be marketing people for Clean Force, but we
I
did
might.
think that like among the options that were available that we could find, that was literally the best one that you could buy when we bought them in terms of high flow rate, low noise, had the air
More
sensor.
being a reliable company that might still sell filters in
Yeah.
the future.
That's the other thing, that with these purifiers, they're constantly being upgraded or changed and things like that. So we wanted to make sure that we were trying to buy from companies that seem they've been up and running for a while, that they weren't going to change it on you. Now folks have a purifier, there's no replacement filters for them.
Yeah.
I mean, but we'll see this year, right? If we can still buy, or as Shay mentioned, we're going forward with the CA100 Karuk filters project. And so maybe we'll get these and we'll see if maybe they cancel them. Now, maybe they're discontinued, and now what do we do? Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate that. That's a lot of legwork. There's a lot of factors involved in selecting the right air filter, air purifier system. And I also really appreciate that you guys are, doing the research, but also really doing the action of getting these air filters available for Karuk households this next year, which is really awesome. I have one other question that I'm going to ask, but I'm also encouraging folks to keep thinking about those questions and adding them into the chat, so it's not just Colleen's question and answer section. But on, I think it was Deep Tea, what you were sharing about good smoke versus bad smoke. I thought that was a really interesting conversation. Certainly have heard a lot of conversation around good fire and bad fire, kind of expanding that concept into smoke. And I was wondering if as a part of this research, or I don't know, existing research, if there's conversations around the effects of smoke or certain types of smoke on reducing kind of fungal, bacterial, microbial, airborne, like things that could potentially be infective. I mean, even viral particles, whether there's any kind of existing narratives around the beneficial aspects of smoke, because that is something that we don't hear a lot about as much, I guess, as the bad parts of smoke.
Thanks for that great question, Colleen. I will say that while I haven't heard or seen it in the airborne context, I have seen conversations around smoke being really helpful for reducing insects in, fibers and things like that. I will also say that, and that's in this, in the context of this project, certainly through our interviews, people have talked about how having fire and smoke is really important for making sure that to protect the health of the fibers that are culturally important and needed for basketry and other things like that. The other context in which I work on smoke and fire is in India, which is, where I'm from. And there people use smoke and fire to reduce insect populations in crops. So thinking not just about fibers, but even about grains and other sorts of food related things. But your question about airborne pathogens is really interesting. And I haven't seen anything on that, but I'll certainly keep an eye out for it and get back to you if I see anything on that.
Thank you, Deepti. Yeah, and I know for acorns in particular, as far as a food source, that's certainly something people talk about around here for the insect populations in particular. But yeah, I would be curious. I mean, you know, the sun oak death, or you know, like kind of there's pathogens that are affecting plants, and then there's pathogens that affect humans, and certainly a lot of you know, practices around using smoke for a lot of health benefits. So that's a bit where my question originated. And then you all had some questions for the group that I know there were two, at least that I remember, Peter. So I was wondering if maybe you could repeat those in case folks want to think about them and get in touch with you guys and share any of their perspectives and kind of leave those fresh in folks' minds before we close.
Yeah, thank you. And you know, I think this is the most important question to me, which is, you know, really looking for feedback on how the kinds of things that we've talked about, how air filtration, air sensors, and resilient energy, you know, how those infrastructure investments could best support prescribed and cultural firework that a lot of you on this call are working on. That's the question. You know, we have some idea about that. I mean, obviously more is better, but a lot of times you have to make choices about where resources go. So it's really about understanding where can those resources best be targeted? What are the highest priority needs?
Great. Thank you, Peter. So that's kind of a question about both, you know, where to be placing the centers, like how, you know, how to be distributing the filters, or, you know, where those can be most beneficial. And then also the data and information needs, kind of three part.
Yeah, the data and information is definitely part of it. So if you find yourself saying, I don't know how to answer that question, then maybe the answer is more like, we need to talk more and think about how we can support knowledge about what's possible for, because there are a lot of possibilities with air sensing and with air filtration now, so that you don't just have to guess about whether it's smoky outside, or you don't have to just put a wet bandana over your face and sit in the dark in your living room waiting for the smoke.
Yeah, or I want my neighbor to be on board with prescribed fires. How can I help my neighbor get on board? Maybe it's having these purple air sensors there, like the plots we're showing, that compared to, you know, crazy big wildfires, the smoke from these prescribed agricultural burns is like not as severe and is definitely variable depending on the locations. And so maybe it's like, maybe folks want more of these air sensors around or things like that. I see Jana has her hand up.
Yeah, I think I just want to add a couple of pieces on how we get power to these sensors and power and data to these sensors. So as we think through kind of business as usual data gathering, and then data gathering in a wildfire or other emergency, obviously it's much easier to do that if you have a good, reliable source of power. So part of this, as we've talked about, is looking at kind of the state of the art as it relates to microgrids, and also mobile backup generation that doesn't rely on, that relies on cleaner, more reliable sources of energy, and doesn't rely on getting gas and or diesel out to far-flung places. So as we think through how to do kind of the best setup based on the best location and the activities that are happening there, we're also taking a look at how to enable power and internet or cellular connectivity out to these places as well. And that's a whole other discussion for a different day. But is definitely one of the major components of this project.
Really important point. Thanks for bringing that into it, Jana. And well, one thing is that I was at the prescribed fire at Deshaunic last night, and I did inhale a lot of smoke. And I was certainly thinking, I mean, the wet bandana did seem like it would probably be the best route that I didn't have on me, but thinking about, protective gear for those doing the burning is something that was certainly on my mind. It is this morning as I still feel it in my lungs today. But I will be moving us into the close. Really appreciate you guys taking the time to share what you've been finding, all this wonderful work that you've been doing, the air part in particular, but crossing across the smoke, air, fire, and energy spectrum. Really appreciate you all a lot. And thank you everybody for tuning in to this second of the Western Klamath Restoration Partnership speaker series. Again, this has been recorded and the recording will be available on the website, which is here, wkrp.network, and also a plug to follow the WKRP on social media platforms. Thank you again for joining us, and please follow up. Feel free to email myself or Jody if you have any further feedback or questions for any of the panelists today, and I'll be sure to get you in touch with the right person. So thank you everyone, Yotwa, and hope you have a wonderful evening.
Thank you, Colleen. Thank you, Jody.
Thanks, Erin.
Thank you.
Feel free